Ian, it's always good to talk to you. Thanks for the time.
Sure, Carl.
There's been a lot of discussion about the reserves and the gold and the military buildup that Putin's been able to assemble ahead of all of this. You think that makes him more accepting of any kind of sanction risk?
I think that's pretty clear. I mean, you know, he's gamed out that the maximum level of sanctions that the Americans and Europeans are prepared to mete out are very severe. They're by far the most severe we will have placed against a major power since the Soviet Union's collapsed. But they ultimately amount to roughly where we are with the Iranians. And the Putin considers that he can handle that. I think there's a big question about what he does in response. It's important to remember, Carl, that when we put all those sanctions on Iran, we basically said we want to drive the Iranians to their knees and force them to negotiate, or else we'd like to get that government out of power. Now, we might not say that about Putin, but he knows it. And in response, I don't think he's just going to sit. I mean, I do think that we will see a revival of cyber attacks against the United States and the West. And I also think we'll see other economic measures that are going to make life more difficult for the Americans and Europeans.
So is it your view that he will move to weaponize commodity exports? And how does he do that on this very same day where he says we want to remain part of the global economy?
Yeah, well, I don't think, look, he's said many things, Carl. I mean, if you're asking how I respond to what Putin is saying, my response is for the last month, Putin has breathtakingly lied about everything directly to the face of President Biden and Chancellor Scholz and President Macron. Anything from I have no intention to invade to just last week, I'm pulling troops out of Belarus, we're withdrawing. All of that was provably and staggeringly false. So I don't really care what he has to say about being a part of the global economy either. I do think the fact that the Chinese government did this joint statement with President Putin that included significant amounts of investment and talk about, willingness to engage in energy infrastructure investment that really are going to cushion the blow for the Russians over the longer term. I think that made it easier to make this decision.
Ian, what's your take on Beijing and it being kind of a wild card in the equation at this point in time? Beijing has yet to truly condemn the attacks on the Ukraine at this point in time. Biden declining to comment whether he was pushing them to do so. Is Beijing part of the thinking in Russia at this point in time that they could potentially stem any kind of sanctions blow because they do have an ally there?
The Europeans have been directly trying to push the Chinese to condemn the strikes. We have seen some statements from the Chinese foreign ministry being critical of the sanctions, saying that's not going to help, but so far not being critical of the decision by President Putin to attack. But look, I think that given the fact that Putin made this trip to Beijing and given the fact that the Chinese gave him this sort of unprecedented joint statement that aligned diplomatically as well as on security worldview, that the containment of Russia from the Europeans and the Americans was sort of analogous to what the Americans and the East Asians and the Indians are doing with the Quad in China. I have a hard time imagining that Putin made the invasion decision without at least giving Xi Jinping a heads up. And if Xi wasn't happy about it, and I'm sure he's not happy, I don't think he pressed the veto either. So I think we are going to be limited in just how much proactive support we're going to get from China. I don't think that they would engage in a veto with the Russians if there was condemnation in the Security Council, for example. And I also think that over the coming weeks after the Ukrainian government is overthrown and the Russians feel like they have some stability in what they've accomplished, the Chinese quietly might be useful behind the scenes to try to put some guardrails on some of the imperial ambitions that President Putin clearly has. But for right now, China is not fighting with the Americans and NATO to fix this problem.